How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the House of Horror, and I don't know about you guys, but I definitely think that the whole zombie craze has been played out. Yet here I am making a video about zombies. Over the past decade or so, or even longer, we've definitely seen an overabundance of zombie films and TV shows, ranging anywhere from comedy films like Zombieland and its sequel Zombieland Double Tap, which comes out later this month, to super serious takes like The Walking Dead and its prequel Fear the Walking Dead, to even teen romances like Warm Bodies. Of course, there's tons of great zombie movies out there, but there's definitely way too many to keep track of, and they don't really provide enough innovation to keep things fresh and interesting. But today, we're not talking about any of those films. We're going all the way back to the one that started it all, George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Over 50 years since it was originally released, I still believe that this is the best zombie film ever made, and it's just as relevant today as it ever was. Today we're going to be looking at some of the most interesting facts about this illustrious film that maybe some of the most hardcore fans don't even know. As always, there's tons of neat facts about Night of the Living Dead out there, more than we're able to cover in just one video, so if you know of any interesting facts that I may have missed out, let me know down in the comment section below. But let's get right to it, so sit back, relax, and enjoy Night of the Living Dead 15 Phenomenal Facts. Number 15. It was the first modern depiction of zombies. That's right, the version of zombies that have pretty much become commonplace in pop culture originated here. They're the undead, they eat flesh, and you can only kill them by destroying the brain. This is the classic archetype of what a zombie is. And of course, some interpretations deviate from this a bit, but the general idea is still there. This wasn't the first zombie film ever, obviously, but this was the first one that made them what they are today. Before this, zombies were usually living beings who were put under some sort of spell or a voodoo curse, which we can see in the 1932 classic White Zombie starring Bela Lugosi. But not until 1968 with Night of the Living Dead did we see our modern zombie. So zombies in the sense that we know them today are actually a relatively new monster. And funny enough, they weren't actually ever called that in the original film. Number 14. The creatures aren't referred to as zombies. Huh? That's right. Not once is the word zombie used to describe the creatures at all in the original film. The most common euphemism used to describe them is those things. Other characters refer to the living dead as ghouls or even flesh eaters. So yeah, it's pretty interesting that the film that basically invented our modern zombie doesn't even call them that. I mean, I guess it makes sense. Since this is the first modern depiction of zombies, the characters in the film wouldn't really know what a zombie is called. I'm sure behind the scenes and whatnot, the cast and crew referred to them as zombies, but as far as the characters in the film, they don't. In fact, funnily enough, the film almost wasn't even about zombies at all. Number 13. It was almost about aliens. It's pretty unbelievable that probably the most famous zombie film almost wasn't about zombies at all. George Romero was working at a commercial film production company in Pittsburgh at the time, when he and a few of his co-workers decided they wanted to try their hand at making their own feature film. Eventually, of course, they created Night of the Living Dead, but early concepts couldn't have been more different. Well, I guess they were still horror films, so I guess it wasn't that far off. It's not like they were trying to make a heartfelt family drama or anything. The original idea actually was a horror comedy about hot-rodding alien teenagers who basically just come to Earth and cause a bunch of mischief. It seems a bit ridiculous, and of course trying to pull something off like that was way out of their budget. Through brainstorming, they eventually had the idea of flesh-eating alien creatures, which planted the seeds of what Night of the Living Dead would eventually transform into. The flesh-eating concept stayed, but the alien concept was swapped out for the living dead. Not living dead like a vampire or something like that, but something completely different. However, vampires did play a key element in the creation of the story. Number 12. It's basically an I Am Legend ripoff. It's crazy to think that a movie that has since been ripped off so many times was in essence a ripoff itself. Well, maybe that word is a little bit harsh, but George Romero himself has even referred to it as that. It was heavily inspired by Richard Matheson's apocalyptic horror epic I Am Legend. The filmmakers basically combined the concepts that they already had with the basic story of I Am Legend, which in a nutshell is one man's quest for survival in a world where all living beings have been turned into blood-sucking vampires. So the basic concept is the same, but the vampires were swapped out for flesh-eating zombies. There's obviously way more to I Am Legend than just that, and these stories aren't exactly the same, but the general idea is still there. And actually, as far as film versions of I Am Legend go, Night of the Living Dead is leagues above the rest of them, so don't worry about it, all is forgiven. Personally, I think the general idea works better with zombies anyway. Once they had their story down, it was time to get their cast. Number 11. The Ben character was changed from the original concept. It's hard to imagine Night of the Living Dead without Dwayne Jones and his powerful performance as Ben. But the original version of the character was actually quite different from what it ultimately ended up being, and the changes were obviously for the best. Originally, the character was written as an angry, crude, but still sort of resourceful truck driver, and was written without race in mind. But when Dwayne Jones auditioned for the role, the team completely reworked the character around him, and Jones himself actually had quite a lot of input in making these changes. At the time, the nation was still rampant with high racial tensions, and the film was actually released shortly after the assassination of Martin Luther King. Jones brought up some concerns about the character's dialogue and actions, afraid of how it would have been widely perceived in the United States at the time to see a black man acting this way. The final version of the character, while still having some edgy moments, is given a much more subdued and intellectual personality, which not only better reflected his performance, but also who he was as a person in real life, as he was a very self-serious and academic person. As I mentioned, these changes were ultimately for the better, and Dwayne's performance stands the test of time, and it's really what makes the movie as great as it is. Of course, all of us here on the channel know Dwayne Jones from the ridiculously awful second half of Fright House. Not one of his shining moments, but either way, we'll touch more on Dwayne later on, but let's talk about our almost leading lady. Number 10. Lady Aberlin from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was almost Barbara.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Funnily enough, before becoming a legendary filmmaker, George Romero actually got his start working on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood of all places. It's wild to think that one of the filmmakers responsible for some of the most gruesome and terrifying films of all time got his start on a quaint and lovable children's show. In the film business, it's all about who you know, and as such, when Romero was casting for Night of the Living Dead, he wanted Lady Aberlin to play Barbara. Of course, at the time, she was still appearing regularly on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It was almost a done deal until Fred Rogers himself stepped in and said, and I quote, "Hell to the fuck no." Okay, that's probably not exactly what he said, but either way, Betty wasn't allowed to take part in Night of the Living Dead for fairly obvious reasons, and this led to the eventual casting of Judith O'Dea for the role. So yeah, it was pretty difficult to nail down an actress for Barbara, and it was also difficult to cast a zombie willing to set the screen on fire with their performance, or rather, have themselves set on fire. Number 9. Writer John Russo stepped in to play a zombie, and it's one hell of a cameo. There were obviously a ton of extras who were cast to play the zombies in the film, but when it came to finding ones who would really go that extra mile and perform some crazy stunts, they were few and far between. As such, writer John Russo was thrown in head first, literally, as he plays the zombie who gets his head bashed in by Ben and is eventually set on fire. And yes, he was actually on fire there. Back then, especially given the budget, that really wasn't something you could fake. Something you could fake, however, was the gruesome effects of the zombies eating flesh. And how was that effect achieved, you may ask?
You want to know what it is? It's Bosco.
Number 8. Chocolate-covered ham. Sounds scrumptious? Obviously, the zombies weren't actually going to eat human flesh in the film, so the team had to get some sort of alternative to make it look realistic. Their solution was using roast ham for the meat and covering it with Bosco chocolate sauce for the blood.
Bosco!
Quiet, it's a secret.
Bosco! Bosco!
This naturally is pretty gross in and of itself, and the filmmakers actually joked that it was so nauseating to the zombies who had to partake in this feast that they probably didn't even need makeup to give them their undead appearance, as the putrid taste made them look pretty pale and sickly anyway. The team was forced to get creative with these effects, and it doesn't look half bad. I guess you're forced to do what you gotta do when you're on such a tight budget. Number 7. They began filming even though they didn't have enough money to actually finish. Even low-budget films cost a ton of money to produce, and Romero and the gang only started with $6,000 out of the eventual $144,000 budget. They started with 10 investors, one of which was Romero himself, who chipped in $600 apiece, and their plan was to just keep shooting until the money ran out. Then they would take that footage and attempt to get more investors with it, and just keep repeating this process until the film was eventually finished. And this plan worked in the long run, but had quite the stop-and-go nature as it took 9 months to finish, and out of that time they only shot for 30 days. So yeah, had things not gone according to plan, the film could have easily gone unfinished. Now, speaking of the finish of the film, Number 6. There was an alternate ending. So the next couple entries on our list are going to get into some spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen the film before and don't want it ruined for you, you can skip ahead to the time shown now. But if you have seen the film before or don't necessarily care about spoilers, take a quick second and subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you know when new episodes of the House of Horror come out. I mean, come on, it's free, why not? Alright, let's get back to the video. As we all know, the film has an especially grim ending, in which our only survivor, Ben, is shot by the zombie hunters who, instead of, doing anything to communicate with Ben at all, they just assume he's a zombie and kill him immediately. But at one point, the film was set to end on a much happier note. But Jones, using his intellect and light creative control once again, fought it and won. He was quoted in saying that the black community would rather see him dead than saved after all that he had gone through in a corny and symbolically confusing kind of way. Again, this was at a period in time where racial tension was high. So this change lets the film have a more deeper meaning than it already did. Jones went on to say that the heroes never die in American movies, and the double jolt of the hero being black seemed like a double-barreled whammy, and he was certainly right. To bring this up to modern day, we see something similar in the film Get Out, where at the end, after our lead Chris has fought his hardest to survive the night, we see the police lights start to flash. And again, even today we are at a period where we can still see racism in our day-to-day lives. And this moment really gives a gut punch that the world really needed. Of course in Get Out this was just a fake out ending, but the emotion is still there. In Night of the Living Dead, however, they go all in on this and it evokes a similar feeling. It was really ahead of its time and I'm sure audiences didn't see it coming. Hell, the actor who played the shooter didn't even see it coming. Number 5. The actor who killed Ben didn't find out until he saw the movie in theaters. Vince Cervinski, interesting name, was the production manager for the film and also played the zombie hunter who ultimately brought about the end of Ben. However, Cervinski had no idea about his key role. He just did what he was told to do in the scene and had no idea who or what he was shooting at until he saw the film in theaters. I guess he went to see it at a matinee with an audience of kids and was afraid to leave the theater and be seen out in the open. So he decided to wait around until everyone left and snuck out the back door. I'm not sure what age range we're talking about here, as he just refers to them as kids. They could have been teenagers, young adults, or they could have been actual children, who knows. But either way, I guess he thought they took kayfabe real seriously and he was the biggest heel in the building. No, he wasn't an actor playing a role, this was actually the guy that killed Ben. Either way, that's a pretty interesting way to find out that you took part in one of the most impactful endings in horror film history. And it is pretty amusing that he was scared he was gonna get jumped by a bunch of kids. And funnily enough, this was one of the last horror films that kids would have been able to get into. Number 4. The MPAA rating system. Although a lot of Night of the Living Dead is tame by today's standards, back then it was pretty hardcore. And this was the first and last movie to depict such violence with attendance of children and young teenagers unsupervised. The initial release of the film in 1968 came just a few weeks before the MPAA's rating system was issued. In fact, some people believe that the reason that the rating system was even put into place was because of Night of the Living Dead. If that is the case, it makes it even more historically significant than it would have been otherwise. But others just believe it was a freak coincidence. But either way, it was the last of its kind. At the time, it did leave children genuinely terrified with such a balls-to-the-wall story that they were completely unprepared for. So it was a pretty good thing that some sort of rating system was put into effect. It was slightly different and less specific than it is today, but it was certainly better than nothing. Although Night of the Living Dead is seen as a classic today, it did receive some pretty negative press when it first came out. Number 3. Roger Ebert's controversial review. Roger Ebert, who at the time was an unknown critic, had some less than positive words to say about it in his strange article in the June 1969 edition of Reader's Digest. The piece itself isn't really a review of the film, it's more or less a reaction to the carelessness of the filmmaking system at the time, and the unresponsible parents who let their kids see the film as mentioned in the previous entry. It's a pretty, well, uncomfortable read. First off, he gives away the entire plot of the movie beat by beat, including the ending, essentially ruining it for everyone who hadn't seen the film. Even more shocking, he doesn't even refer to the lead character Ben by name, but rather uses more racially insensitive verbiage. It's pretty insane that a major publication at this point in time would even allow that sort of thing, and it's pretty unsettling. I mean, seriously, he watched the movie, he had to have known the main character's name, presumably, so in my opinion, it's a combination of laziness and blatant demeaning insensitivity. It really puts into perspective the state of America at the time. Look, I'm not trying to take a hit at Roger Ebert's character or anything like that, it's just very strange that this was allowed at the time. and it's genuinely shocking. But it does make you look at the critic and the publication in a sort of different light, and I don't know if there was ever an apology issued about this. Ultimately, the Reader's Digest article did both Roger Ebert and the film itself a ton of good in the long run. It made his reviews a must-read and led to him becoming perhaps the most famous film critic of all time. And it made the film itself something that absolutely had to be seen, and seen it was. Number 2. An error caused the film to fall into the public domain, and it's probably one of the best public domain movies you're ever gonna find, if not the best. The reason it fell into the public domain in the first place is due to a big mistake when it came to copyrighting the film. The distributors originally wanted to release the film under the title Night of the Flesh Eaters, but there were some complications as there was a film a few years prior simply called The Flesh Eaters. Some lawyers got involved and eventually they had to change the title to Night of the Living Dead. In doing this, however, they didn't add the proper copyright notices to the beginning or the end of the film, so there was nothing that they could do about it after the fact. Even though Romero and his team fought hard for it in court, the film remains in the public domain even to this day, meaning that you can do essentially whatever you want to it. There have been so many releases of Night of the Living Dead on VHS and those shitty horror movie bundle packs. It's online for completely free even on YouTube, and it's been remixed and re-edited a plethora of times, all of which for the most part the filmmakers haven't seen a dime from. Although the film's public domain status makes it readily available and contributed greatly to the film's popularity, it also led to a good amount of embarrassment. Number 1. Stay away from the infamous 30th Anniversary Edition. So yeah, as I mentioned, since the film is in public domain, you can do basically whatever you want to it. And some of the filmmakers, including writer John Russo, did just that to celebrate the film's 30th anniversary. They pulled a regular George Lucas on us and decided to go ahead and attempt to fix something that wasn't broken. They filmed some unnecessary new scenes, providing a backstory to the cemetery zombie, and even got the original actor Bill Heinzman to reprise his role, even though it was 30 years later and he looks absolutely nothing like he did back then, so the footage doesn't match at all. It also adds a bunch of nonsense scenes with some priest played by the film's new composer. That's right, a new composer. Not only did they feel it necessary to tack on an additional 17 minutes of worthless crap, they also destroyed the film itself by actually cutting chunks out of it and putting in new music. Good lord, they completely butchered it. It's so awful. For curiosity's sake, you can check out the additional scenes on YouTube, but other than that, avoid this version at all costs and don't spend your hard-earned money on it. George Romero was obviously not involved in these changes, and before his death, I'm not sure if he ever had an official comment about it or not. I guess we can only speculate what his reaction was to this monstrosity, if he ever even watched it. Either way, there are plenty of good official releases of Night of the Living Dead for you to check out, and I highly advise that you do. As it stands through countless production pitfalls, lawsuits, and all the other trials and tribulations, Night of the Living Dead still remains one of, if not the greatest zombie film of all time. Well, that is about it for this time, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If there were any Night of the Living Dead facts that you guys know that I didn't mention here, let me know down in the comments section below. And let me know what you would like to see in a future episode of 15 Phenomenal Facts. And again, if you guys haven't subscribed to my channel or turned on notifications yet, it would really help me out a lot. I've got a ton more horror-related videos coming your way and you don't want to miss them. And if you were to take a quick second and just give this video a thumbs up, it's really appreciated. That is about it for this time, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you back here tomorrow for another episode of the House of Horror. Take care and stay spooky.